Hi, everybody. My name is Vince Arnasia. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Five9 Software. Joining me today is Rob Conley, one of our Senior Solutions Engineers who's really focused on the Five9 platform and is also an ex-practitioner in the space. Welcome to today's Demo Friday. We are excited to present to you a topic that's pretty prevalent in the space, focused around cloud migration. Cloud migration effectively speaks to the need for customers to move from one cloud infrastructure to another. And the source and the target can, of course, vary there depending on your infrastructure. And today we're going to cover the Five9 Cloud Migration product and the benefits of that particular technology. For those of you that aren't familiar with Five9, a little bit about the company here on this particular slide. The company's been around for 6-7 years with the officially launched products that we'll be discussing today. We've established a really big footprint, I would say, over the years, a global footprint with a lot of customers that are in various different verticals, customers that are of different sizes, service providers as customers, really over 1,000 active customers using the technology that spans the migration product, the manager product, and as we've previously shown, the security product. The goal of Five9 is to continue to provide customers with the ability to do their day-to-day tasks, the system administrators, of course, for the Microsoft Cloud, whether it be trying to help them simplify, optimize, and of course secure their Microsoft hybrid cloud. The reason we're able to do this is we have a deep relationship with Microsoft, and we actually work directly with their engineering group and of course their program management group. A little bit about the overall Five9 platform before we dig into cloud migration specifically. What you're looking at here is a overall architecture slide of the Five9 platform. You can see towards the bottom, if you start from the bottom going up, we cover a variety of Microsoft infrastructure environments. Over the years, we've of course covered HyperV, and recently last year we added Azure support. In the very near future, we're going to be adding Azure Stack support, given the adoption increasing with Azure Stack. But the kind of functionality that the platform provides really gives you a great breadth of coverage, starting with the migration capability that is, of course, accessible via a standalone product, and aspects of migration are actually integrated into Manager. The Cloud Manager product comprises of the ability to manage your private and public cloud infrastructure all via a single interface. We have replication options within the Manager product for both on-prem and Azure. Of course, the ability to do real-time alerting and monitoring for your virtual infrastructure. The ability to provide dynamic optimization, integrated backup and disaster recovery are also built into the Manager product. And for the larger customers and or the service providers, the administration module, which is also into the Cloud Manager product, provides granular role-based access control, so you can assign certain rights and privileges to various admins across the enterprise so that you can establish the organizational structure the way it needs to be. On the far right is the security box, and really the security product is a standalone offering which provides you the ability to protect your virtual infrastructure, whether it be private or public, with capabilities like virtual firewall, intrusion detection, agentless antivirus, anomaly detection, etc. As far as the overall platform goes, you can see towards the top, we do provide REST APIs, so a lot of our customers like to integrate our capabilities into their interfaces or into their back-end systems, and so Five9 can actually step right in and have customers leverage those APIs so that it's a more seamless experience. It leads to automation and, of course, scale for a lot of our customers. The platform is multi-tenant, and so fits very nicely with service providers and their needs. And then, of course, as we've discussed here, it's a very modular architecture. And so over the years, we've added all these different capabilities. And of course, we continue to add more capabilities within the platform. So with that established, I'm going to hand it over to Rob Conley, who's going to walk you through the cloud migration product from here on out. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Vince. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. What I'm going to do is run us through the cloud migration product, some tips and tricks on making the best for your migrations, and we'll run through all the different aspects of it. First off, you'll notice that it is fast and easy migration, and we support migrating your VMware to either HyperV, Azure, or AWS. It is a standalone product, so it's a single install. It is non-intrusive in the way that you will not have to make any changes to your existing environment. And you do this by running the actual migration tool, and you would run it typically from the hypervisor, from the HyperV side, for example, if you're migrating to HyperV. And at that point, you would very easily just bring in the VMware servers and start the migration. But we do have the highest success ratio on the market today compared to other tools. The software is based, and it is agentless design. So we don't have to worry about installing anything on the actual VMs or the hosts themselves. We just connect directly to the ESXi host and pull the virtual machine. And so, of course, it doesn't require any additional hardware. The only additional hardware that may be required is if you don't have enough disk space. Again, if you are migrating to Hyper-V, if you don't have enough disk space to temporarily store that VMDK file while it's being converted. But in most cases, you should have enough disk space available. We can migrate every OS that's supported by Hyper-V, including the latest Linux, Unix, any type of workload. This is because we're not actually converting the operating system itself. Our conversion tool is actually going to convert the configuration files of the VMware machine and the disk. So the underlying operating system, for us, we make no changes there. Companies doing large-scale migrations, they take advantage of our PowerShell ability too. So on the screen in front of you, you're looking at the actual UI itself. But if needed, you can script out these using PowerShell. We have more information about that actually on our website. And we'll show some more detail about that a little later. So what do we cover? So we cover migrating from VMware. So VMware is always the start. Then from there, you can take those VMs, easily push them over to your Hyper-V infrastructure. I hear all the time, a lot of people are moving to Hyper-V from VMware. Most of the time, it has to do with licensing costs, is what I hear mostly from customers. But there could be some other reasons why you might be moving your VMware to Hyper-V. And so you could also consider AWS or Azure for those workloads. You can automate this entire process using the scripting. And that is the suggested way if you are doing a large-scale project. Through the automation scripting, you can also take care of additional features or additional steps that might be required to complete your migrations. We can run multiple jobs simultaneously and expedite the migration times. And you could do this by either running multiple copies of the actual conversion UI, but in most cases, to achieve the fastest conversions, again, I would suggest to use the PowerShell method. You could easily create jobs in batches and batch maybe 5 or 10 at a time, maybe schedule them to run after hours when the office is closed. And these tools gives you the reduced burden of managing agents. So again, we don't worry about agents running on the actual VMs or on the Hyper-V host. You don't have to worry about installing them or maintaining them. Makes it very easy. So let's look at the cloud migration process from ESXi to Hyper-V. So it's very simple. It just takes these 8 steps. Basically, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to select the VMware ESXi source server. A lot of customers I work with make the mistake of connecting to their vCenter. The conversions will go much faster if you do connect directly to the ESXi source server. Typically, you want to log in with a user that has administrative rights. That way we can actually convert the disks. So once you actually select your ESXi source server, you're then going to be listed with a number of VMs. You would select the VM that you would want to migrate. And in the edit configuration part, so this is where you're going to specify that on ESXi, this virtual machine is using my network adapters. But on the Hyper-V side, you need to assign that network adapter to a corresponding network adapter on Hyper-V that's already been created. So that's what the edit VM configuration part's doing for you. It's going to line up the network cards on both sides. Obviously, you're going to select the Hyper-V server for the destination server or cluster. And of course, we verify that that destination resource is available. You're going to specify a temporary storage path. So this is really important. What happens is we actually copy the disk off of VMware and store it in this temporary path, and then we convert it to a VHDX. So that's why it's important that your temporary storage path does have that disk space required in order to store the original copy of that VHD, but also the converted copy. And then that converted copy is moved over to the actual Hyper-V host. In some cases, clients use the Hyper-V host as temporary storage also. They put it all in the same spot. That's also fine. You'll receive a summary of the actual conversion that's about to take place, and then you kick off the migration process. Obviously, everyone always asks me how long does it take to migrate a virtual machine. It's one of the most common questions, and what I suggest to everyone is that this obviously changes based on all environments, depending on your disk speeds and your networks, the distance between the ESXi host and the Hyper-V. So what you should do is you can download Cloud Migration today from our website and migrate one virtual machine. And let's say that virtual machine is 20 gigs. Use that as your baseline. Determine then what the total amount would take. So if your 20 gig VM transfer took 10 minutes and you have 200 terabytes in your environment, you can do the math and figure out exactly how long it might take. You can also reduce that time by using the batching method, where we might be doing 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 conversions at a time. That is going to be really based on your environment and through output, how many you can actually do at a time. So we make it very simple through the UI. So if you don't want to use the PowerShell method, the UI makes it very simple. You can quickly migrate from the source to the target. Conversion happens about 30% faster, and it brings your services back online sooner. So what this means is that it's very important that you can easily take this software and install it. For example, let's say you're running Hyper-V, and all you have is the Hyper-V server on the Windows side. You could very easily just install this UI on that Hyper-V host and pull the machines from your VMware server, and then simply deploy them back onto that Hyper-V host that's running the cloud migration software. Standalone, it requires no additional hardware, appliances, network changes, and we do support every Hyper-V guest operating system. And we always like to tell you that we are the fastest conversion tool available. So how migration works, it's very simple. The VM's configuration settings are remapped. So as I said earlier, we're going to take the VMX file, which is VMware's configuration file for that virtual machine, and we're going to convert it to Hyper-V's format, XML. We're going to copy the name of the virtual machine, all the memory settings, the virtual networks, the virtual disks. All that detail is in that VMX file. We're going to convert that over to the XML and the Hyper-V format. As I said earlier, you're going to have to line up the virtual networks, but that's very easy. The UI actually identifies the virtual networks and attempts to map them for you. So the VM's hard disk is copied to a temporary location. And as I spoke about earlier, we're going to copy all that data to that temp folder. And that temp folder can either be a network share, it can be another disk inside the HyperV host, or it can be the primary HyperV host storage location. It's very flexible. It's up to you to select where the temp location is. And then after the conversion process is done, we do the heavy lifting. We pick that new virtual machine, an XML file that's been created. We ship it over to your Hyper-V host, and we import it. So then you have the VM running inside your Hyper-V at that point. So this is kind of, I have a little picture here. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do a live migration on the webinar today due to the time it takes to migrate the machines. So we're showing basically through screenshots here. But what you can see down here in the screenshot is a conversion that's being done through the PowerShell method. You'll see in the area that first we're adding the PSS snap-in. So that's our actual command list in order to do the conversions. And then the next part is just a simple one-line command, convert-VM. You're going to pass it all the configuration values that are required, and then it will start the actual conversion process. Once the conversion is done, it's going to return back to you the VM ID, the actual ID of that new virtual machine in Hyper-V. So at that point, you can even do additional scripting actions on that. So now you have the new VM ID. You could, for example, the next line could do PowerShell remoting, access that virtual machine, and, for example, remove the VMware tools on it. Or maybe you need to make some other adjustments on that virtual machine now that it's on the Hyper-V side. That can very easily be done after the conversion process because the PowerShell is going to return you that VM ID. So you can continue to script the process. Obviously, you can create jobs. So you can actually take this convert command that you see here, and I can set it out as a job that runs in the background. And then I just start another one and kick it off as a job into the background. So when you're doing large-scale migrations, PowerShell is the way you're going to want to achieve that migration, and it's the most efficient way. So these are just some 4 quick tips for successful migrations. These are some things that I spoke about today when running our software. So if possible, run the Five9 Cloud Migration tool from the Hyper-V host as an administrative user. So this is very important. The user running the Cloud Migration tool needs to have rights over the Hyper-V host in order to create VMs, start VMs. And if you run the Cloud Migration tool directly from the Hyper-V host as an administrative user, it makes things a lot easier for you, less concern of particular permissions or networking between the different machines. Connect directly to the ESXi host server, bypass vCenter. This is something that a lot of people do, is they do connect to the vCenter. It will actually work, but it's going to be a very slow conversion. So it's definitely best that you connect directly to the ESXi host. You would connect particularly with the admin or root level user. Shut down the VM first on the VMware side to save time. So our software, when you do the conversion, before we start the conversion, we're going to turn that virtual machine off anyway if it's running. But you can save time by doing this ahead of time and actually shutting down the VMs beforehand. And last one is verify that your Hyper-V host and temp storage locations have suitable disk space to store both the original VMDX file, but also the converted VHD. So depending on the size of your machines is really probably going to determine if you're going to use temporary locations or if you're just going to use the Hyper-V host itself as the temp store and the final resting point for those virtual machines. So that is the Cloud Migration tool, and there's one ways here that we showed you of being able to, for example, from VMware, easily push this down to a Hyper-V host. or send it up to AWS or Azure. So what I'm going to show you also, because we do have a little bit of extra time today, I'm going to show you some other methods that we have of moving these virtual machines around. In order to do that, I'm going to use our Cloud Manager tool. And so in this example, let's say you've moved your virtual machines from VMware to HyperV, or maybe your virtual machines are on HyperV and you need to migrate them. Whether that migration is just to another HyperV host, it could be a replication to a remote site, or maybe it's moving to Azure. So we also have another tool, the Cloud Manager tool, which I'll show you in a second, that is going to be able to perform these tasks from HyperV. I just wanted to kind of point those out here real quick. So I'll go ahead and change my screen here 1 second. All right, so what you're looking at here is our Cloud Manager tool. And this tool is going to reside on the hypervisor itself. You can obviously run the console from any location, but what we do is we install agents in the actual hypervisors that then show us all the virtual machines. But what I'd like to focus on is basically moving virtual machines around. So what we're looking at here is 2 Hyper-V hosts. These are the VMs. These 2 hosts are in a cluster in one data center. Down here is a DR host in a different data center. So let's look at some ways to move these VMs around. So internally within the Hyper-V hosts, you could very easily take this virtual machine, this DHCP machine here, and I can add it to the cluster. And obviously, once you add a machine into the cluster, you can then have access to moving that machine to another host via a live migration. And so what that's going to do, it's going to take that virtual machine and move it while it's running to another host. I'm going to allow it to select the best possible host. And then what it should do, it should take that virtual machine as long as it's suitable and move it over to node 1. But also, and it's going to do this process while that virtual machine is running. So that gives you that simple migration line. In order to do this, though, you have to be within a cluster on shared storage. So let's say you're not in a cluster. You just have 2 Hyper-V hosts, either sitting right next to you or sitting in different locations. You do have some other options. You can do a move. So this virtual machine here is not in a cluster. It's just a regular virtual machine running. So if I go to the move option here, on this virtual machine, you'll notice that I'm given 2 options. I can either move the virtual machine or just move the virtual machine storage. So in this case, these virtual machines, since they aren't on a cluster, they are going to have to be shut down. Well, actually, they're saved during the process. So it's not as clean as this live migration, but if you're not in a cluster, it still is going to allow you to move those virtual machines around your Hyper-V hosts. Some other options you have also is obviously replication. Replication is not really a migration, but it still kind of falls in the lines of moving virtual machines. And the way we do that is you would add an additional Hyper-V host. In our software, you would go to host settings. I would select replication on that Hyper-V host. I would check this box. And since I'm using internal, all these machines are located within the same building, I'm just going to use standard HTTP. Let's say I was replicating to a machine maybe over the public LAN, I would encrypt that traffic. But in this case, I'm not. So that's all you have to do. You would set up your Hyper-V host, enable those 2 settings. I'll take my nano server here, I'll add it to the cluster. And then I will replicate him. And so what this is going to do, it's going to create a copy of that virtual machine in the remote site. It's going to obviously replicate all the virtual disks. And it can either maintain the latest recovery point, so it's just an always available backup copy sitting in this remote site, or it can maintain recovery points. And in this case, it would be 24. So that means if I need to fail over to this virtual machine, I can fail over to any point in time within the last 24 hours, or maintain the latest recovery point. And obviously I can do this when the offices are closed, so I can schedule when that transfer happens, or I can have it happen automatically. If I select automatic, what this means is every 5 minutes, or what I specify here, it's going to send the changes down to the corresponding virtual machine. So any changes made here will be sent down. And I can send the initial replica. I'll start it immediately and push finish. And so in the background, while this virtual machine is running, it's literally going to take an entire copy of this virtual machine, and it's going to move it down to DR host, and then continually update the copy that's residing on DR host. So if you need it, you can easily fail over to this virtual machine and then fail back to the different location. The way something like that might look is, let's just say this machine's turned off. And you want to fail over to the site, you would right-click, say Replication, Plan Failover. And you'll see it's going to reverse the replication and start the virtual machine. And so it's very easy. So what happens now, this virtual machine is going to turn on and become the primary virtual machine. This becomes a secondary. So now the changes are going this way until this machine's ready to be turned back on again. So that's replication. It's not so much of a migration, but still it's a way to get your VMs out. Using replication is very easy on networks because it uses standard ports. It uses port 80 and port 443. So it makes it very easy to set up, for example, a co-location site or maybe in a different location with a Hyper-V host in it. And one of the last option you have in order to move some VMs around is more like a bulk move. So if I right-click on my Hyper-V host, you get the options to pause the nodes. So obviously, if you pause this node, what's going to happen is all these virtual machines are going to migrate up to this node up here. And then I can do work on this. Let's say I need to run Windows updates, something to that effect. Once that's done, I resume the node, bring the virtual machines back. So those are some options you have on the Hyper-V side in order to move some of your workloads around within your current environment. On the Azure side, though, we have some abilities to actually take these virtual machines and move them into Azure. So this is another migration piece that we have here. So our migration tool that we have today, the Cloud Migration tool, is going to migrate your virtual machines, obviously, from VMware to Azure. It can also do Hyper-V to Azure. But this tool also does Hyper-V to Azure. So if you're currently on Hyper-V and you're looking to migrate machines to Azure, the Cloud Manager tool can do that for you. The way it's going to do that is you'd select, obviously, the Azure Management piece and Azure Management up here. What I have is currently I have my subscription. So this is a subscription that I've added. I have some VMs currently running up in Azure. The tool obviously allows me to connect and view the health of these virtual machines and monitor them. I can receive alerts and connect to them. But for today, what we're doing is we're importing Hyper-V virtual machines. Oops, I don't have enough licensing. Hold on, let me see if I can configure my licensing. I didn't add a license. So we're going to use a little imagination here today. So what we do is we import the virtual machine from Hyper-V. So when you click this option right here, you're presented with all the virtual machines that are residing on your on-premise. So I would see all these virtual machines here. And then I'm given the ability to then to import those virtual machines, or whichever ones I select, into my Azure account. Our software does all the heavy lifting. It's going to take that virtual machine, prepare it. It's going to assign it to your resource groups up in Azure. It's going to tie in your networking, and then the virtual machine becomes available in Azure. It's complete hands-off approach. So really no configuration is required on the Azure side once you add your subscription. And the other option we have is replication. So in replication, we can replicate on-premise virtual machines to Azure also. So if we back up a little bit, as you saw here, the ability of moving that virtual machine down to DR host here and doing that replications back and forth and that data, we have the same ability to do that in the cloud. So what I could easily do is I would select what my recovery vault is. So in Azure, you need to create a recovery vault and a Hyper-V site. So these are two prerequisites that need to be completed beforehand in Azure, which is very simple to set up. And then once you set these up and create them in Azure, they'll instantly show up here in our software because we're talking to your Azure account. So in my case, I created these two sites and recovery vaults. Next, you select your storage account. So it's a Blob storage or recovery storage account that is created. And here I'll configure my Azure networking. So basically what I'm going to tie into is which virtual network in my Azure account I want to use and which subnet I'm going to put this replicated virtual machine on if I need to start it in Azure. Then you'd select your virtual machines. So in this case, I'll select this VM Exchange server, for example. Select the operating system type. And then here's the replication settings, just like we saw earlier. So what this means is every 5 minutes, any data that's written to your on-premise virtual machine in Hyper-V is going to be copied up into Azure. And you can also maintain additional recovery points if you need to recover that. So this is not backup, this is replication. The object here is that if you want to keep your environment on-premise, so here's this VM Nano server, for example. This VM Nano server is really important to my environment. So what I'm doing is I am actually replicating that machine up into Azure. The primary site for that machine is still here. So every day it runs in my environment, it does its work. But if for any reason this VM was ever lost, either by the node going down, data corruption, I could very easily come up here into my replica version up in Azure and start it over, do a failover. And now that server is running up in Azure while I'm repairing my on-premise environment. It provides the same functionality that you saw down here using an on-premise Hyper-V host, but instead you're doing it up in Azure. So the other options obviously are backup too. So in backup, we're able to take the virtual machine itself and we can create the backup and move that virtual machine to Azure also. Difference, obviously, from a replication to the backup is that the replication is going to give you that always available, always updated copy, where the backup is going to actually just be a state and time. So let's say you do a backup once a day. So it's going to be a copy of that virtual machine at that point in time when the backup ran. And that backup is going to reside either on-premise somewhere in your network storage, or it can reside in Azure. And that's what I wanted to show today. So you would encrypt the backup. Obviously, I'll put my encryption key in. Very important to remember your encryption keys because we don't store them locally. So if you ever need to restore your backups, you're going to need the encryption key if you use encryption. And compression, obviously. Then I select which virtual machines I want to back up to Azure. So we need to still define a local data source. The reason why we need to do this is we store the VHD there for a temporary period of time while it's being transferred to Azure. So what we're doing is we're attaching to the Hyper-V host, grabbing the disk from that virtual machine while it's running, and storing it in this location while we convert it and send it to Azure. Very similar to the way the cloud migration product works. So in this case, I'm just using a network file share. So the next option is to take this backup and put it in Azure. I'm going to select the virtual machines. In my case, I only did one. You then next need your Azure Blob storage account. And an Azure Blob storage is very inexpensive storage available by Microsoft. Another key benefit is that you are not charged, at least last I checked, for ingress bandwidth to Azure. So your transfers at nighttime when you're doing your backups will be free. So here I'm going to put my account key in. So what happens is when you create an Azure Blob storage account, they're going to return you a key, and you're going to enter your key here, your account name and your key. And this is returned to you as you create the Blob storage. So next I specify how often I want to do these backups. So I can just manually take this virtual machine right now and move it to Azure as a Blob storage. So in this case, it's not like the import that we saw in Azure Management. That import is going to take that virtual machine and put it up in Azure as a ready-to-go spinning virtual machine. Where the difference here is that we're taking the virtual machine and actually packaging it and storing it in a blob. So it's not a ready-to-go virtual machine, it's just VM storage. And so here I'm going to back this virtual machine up every day to that blob. I can do a full backup every day, or I can do incrementals. So in this case, we'll do a full backup every 7 days. We'll only take the block changes for the days before. And then here, I can use retention. So if I wanted to, I could retain these backups on Azure for, let's say, 30 days. And in this case, the backups will sit up there in Azure. Azure also makes a great backup location because there always is that issue of storing your backups next to your Hyper-V hosts. So this is a very common practice. People do store their backups in the same building a lot of times as their hosts. There obviously is a glaring problem with that, is that if you ever lost that building for any reason, you also could potentially lose your backups, and then it's a total loss. So storing your backups off-site is very important. We're using, obviously, replication methods that I showed you earlier. So this allows you to take those backups and store them up in Azure off-site. So worst case scenario, you did lose all your infrastructure on-site. You could very easily, hypothetically, go across the street, open a new office, and then restore your entire environment back on-premise again through Azure. But another option you have is this, and I really like it, is use retention up here. So what this means is that we did copy the virtual machine to the temporary location while we were converting it to Azure. We have the ability to actually store that copy that we sent over to the temp location. And I like this a lot because it then gives you the option to have that on-premise backup. So you have a copy sitting on-premise, but you also have that just-in-case scenario that we spoke about, in case you lost your on-premise environment. Or you turn it off and it will delete that temporary copy and it'll only store a copy in Azure. So these are some of the ways that we're able to actually move around the virtual machines through our software here in the cloud migration. If you're not familiar with this solution, it is available from our website. You can download it. What I'm using here today is actually a virtual lab. So this virtual lab is available also on our website in the resources section. So you can actually log into this exact same environment, do some of the same steps that you just saw me perform here. Obviously, of course, we include monitoring and reporting for the virtual machines. But today the focus was moving virtual machines around. And I hope I was able to show you how that's done. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and pass back here to Vince as I move my screens. 1 second.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. So just to summarize the demo portion of the webinar today, if you go to the Five9 website, you'll see that there's basically 2 flavors of cloud migration. There's the free version, which of course inherently has limitations, not only from a feature functionality perspective, but also as to the number of VMs that you can convert. And that's to get the customer comfortable and familiar with the cloud migration product and how to interact with it and sort of see it in action. The full product, the cloud migration product, is only limited to the number of VMs that you purchase. So if you buy 200 VMs that you'd like to convert, regardless of source to target, meaning VMware to Azure or Hyper-V to Azure, etc., as you can see here on this slide, the only limitation there is the number of VMs that you actually purchase. So as you purchase more, you get a different license file and you're able to extend your conversions to the number that you need. The way that the product is priced is that it's priced in blocks of VM conversions. So as you convert a block of 200, let's just say you pay a certain amount to get that license file, and then you're able to execute that. And then, as I mentioned, if you're interested in converting more, you purchase another block of 200 or higher, and you're able to introduce that license file into the product and convert more. So the migration product that we're discussing here today is standalone, and it's really meant for a one-time usage of conversion. The capabilities that Rob showed are inherently part of the Cloud Manager product, and those are sort of limited from a Hyper-V to Azure conversion perspective. So hopefully that helps answer some of the questions around licensing and how to get the product. Of course, if you're interested in more information, you can just email sales@five9.com. I do have a couple of questions, Rob, that came in while you were speaking, so we'll wrap up with those. You were showing the ability to import a VM within Azure Management. Is that just for Hyper-V as an input and Azure as an output, or other scenarios also?
At this time, it is only from Hyper-V on-premise to Azure, and that's through the Cloud Manager tool. If you wanted to go to AWS, you would have to use our Cloud Migration tool.
Okay, and then what about Hyper-V to Hyper-V? Is that an option within Cloud Manager, or is that migration only?
Yeah, that's an option within Cloud Manager. So basically, you can very easily move the machines between Hyper-V hosts, whether you're on a cluster or not.
Okay, so that should answer that question from that interested fellow. A couple other questions. As it relates to the migration product, is this included with Manager? No. So I think what's being asked here is migration, as it's described here on the summary slide with sort of the rich set of capabilities, is that included within migration? So at this point, the migration product for its full feature set is standalone, because once again, it's more of a one-time usage type technology. We do in the future plan to create a migration module within the Cloud Manager product, so that customers can leverage the migration capabilities, obviously one time, but also on an ongoing basis as their workloads move around. We're seeing that more, and we're getting those kinds of requests more from our customers. And so in the future, the migration product with its full set of capabilities, from VMware to Azure and VMware to Hyper-V, et cetera, will be part of the Manager product. But for now, Cloud Migration is a standalone solution that provides these needs. Is there REST APIs available for this? So Cloud Migration, we don't have REST APIs. Cloud Manager, the product that Rob just showed, has fully featured REST APIs available for customers to leverage. So really it comes down to where are you in your life cycle of workload management. Are you in the process of migrating from on-prem to, let's say, public cloud? Are you in the process of migrating from VMware to Hyper-V? Because if you're in the process of doing that, you would use the migration product to convert, and then use the Manager product to manage and monitor and backup and replicate, etc. So that would be the sort of the workflow in which customers would use both technologies. Are the slides going to be available? I answered that earlier. Yes, the slides and the recording will be sent out. And so both of those will be emailed with links. In the very near future, we're actually going to be creating a section under the resources part of the website where recorded webinars will be resident for customers to use and learn the technology better on their own time, and still benefit from the demo Fridays that we're trying to do every couple of weeks. All right, well, I think that's all the questions that came in. I think that's it for today. So appreciate everybody joining and learning about cloud migration. In this release that Rob was discussing, we did add support for ESXi 6.7. We're always adding the latest and greatest as it relates to features in third party. There'll be another release of cloud migration coming out in the next few weeks with some additional features that were requested from the field. So we look forward to any questions you might have, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks for the next Demo Friday. Thank you for joining.